I want to talk to you today about top-down processing from our heads down and bottom-up from our bodies up, and why we need both, why we need to integrate and link those together. Top-down processing is when we take something and our mind has been able to understand so many things and has a context so that we can understand what's going on, which helps us recognize patterns, and it's kind of like a shorthand. When we understand it, something, we know, okay, this is how I'm going to behave, or this is how I'm going to interact with the world. It's a quick processing of a lot of sensory inputs so we don't get overwhelmed. We have a kind of like a gate to it. We can keep things in and out and move them through so we don't get overwhelmed. Because in every moment, as we're looking at something, hearing something, there's lots of things that we see, there's sounds that we hear, taste, smells, the feeling of something as we touch them. That's all that input coming in. And we have to be able to sort out what can we use and what not use. And I talked about this in the email I sent out last week about non-conscious understanding. One way to understand it is this. Let's say you have 2 dots and a half moon circle. What we do is we take those simple little data points, 2 dots and a half moon circle, and we say, oh, this means smiley face, right? So we put that in place. If we didn't have that understanding, if we didn't have that context, we wouldn't see that. So that's one way top-down processing is so helpful. In healing, it gets a little bit trickier. There are many of us who've tried to change things, put our mind to something, mental grit. I'm going to get better. I'm just going to power my way through it. And maybe it works for some ways, maybe it doesn't. What has it worked for you and when doesn't it work? That's an important place to be in an inquiry. We can see this with people who do a lot of what practice in manifesting. It can work, and it can work really well until something happens. And that's when that non-conscious processing comes up. The fears, blocks, and resistances interrupt that capacity to just put the mind to it and focus so hard that we go and do it. Something needs to be cleared so that we can get to where we want to go. That's the other point of it. Now, there is another way, and it really is about learning to trust the body's wisdom. And there's 5 points that I like to think about it there. 1 is slowing down, learning how to pause, shifting attention from our outside awareness to being attentive inside, attuning, I call it, attuning inside, self-attunement. And dropping from our head, less around understanding or even making sense of it, and learning how to apprehend our experience. And then being able to sense into it, that experience that we're having instead of thinking about it. What this does is opens the door to what we call bottom-up processing. And bottom-up processing is when we take the smallest pieces of sensory information and understand a context at a higher level for it. For example, this is just a dot, right? This is just a dot. Those are just marks. But that mark is black, and so we already have something about it. We have some sense, maybe it's a felt pen instead of a pencil. There's a half moon that's there. There's words that make up something. All those little tiny bits of information can be broken down into smaller and smaller bits, and that's what we call bottom-up processing, taking those small bits and then building more complex understanding on top of it. So let's do an experiment, and we're going to add some movement to it. When you think that everything in life has a natural life cycle, what happens inside? What thoughts do you have? Do you have any feelings, memories come up? Now, what about when I say and use the words rise, crest, and fall? What happens inside? Rise, crest, and fall. Do you have a thought? Do you have a conceptual understanding of that? And now let's try adding a little movement to it. And let your hands mimic the words. Almost like you're letting your hands describe the words with movement. Not thinking about it, but just letting that happen. For example, how would your hands show what rise is? Likely it's something like this, rise. Crest. It's kind of like this, huh? Crest and fall. Let's try it again. Rise, crest, and fall. And notice what happens inside. I'm curious to hear. Post your comments and let me know.